The hidden truth about the Carr family came out in 2024. In a quiet neighborhood, a seemingly ordinary family was about to face a terrifying and life-threatening ordeal. In today's story, we dive into the chilling events that unfolded when the Carr family became the target of a calculated and deadly poisoner. From mysterious illness to the shocking death of Peggy Carr, the investigation would lead authorities to a dangerous individual hiding in plain sight. Join us as we reveal the unsettling twists of this case, the search for answers, and the relentless pursuit of justice. Don't forget to subscribe and like for more real-life stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. The Carr family lived in the tranquil town of Alturas, Florida, where life seemed calm and uneventful. Known for their unwavering faith and strong family bond, they attended church regularly and were well regarded by neighbors as a close-knit, peaceful household. Their days were marked by simplicity, far from the troubles and chaos often found elsewhere. Yet, their idyllic life took a sinister turn during the summer of 1988, shattering the calm they had always known. It all began on June 14th when 16-year-old Dwayne Carr discovered a strange letter in their mailbox. The letter, unsigned and anonymous, carried a chilling warning. It demanded that the Carr family leave Florida immediately or face deadly consequences. Alarmed by the unsettling note, Dwayne hurried to show it to his parents. His mother, Peggy Carr, was instantly consumed by fear, her mind racing with dread at the thought of someone threatening their family. Pern Carr, her husband, however, dismissed the note as a cruel joke, trying to reassure everyone that there was nothing to worry about. Despite Pern's attempt to brush it off, the letter left a shadow of unease hanging over the family. As summer gave way to fall, the Carr family tried to move on, but the feeling of something ominous lingered. Their lives continued with a cautious sense of normalcy until October 23rd, when Peggy suddenly became gravely ill. It began with bouts of nausea and overwhelming pain that left her bedridden and helpless. Pern initially believed it was a minor illness likely to pass within a few days. He remained optimistic, dismissing Peggy's symptoms as something harmless. But her condition worsened rapidly. Within days, Peggy's hair began falling out in chunks, leaving her and her family deeply distressed. Something was clearly wrong, and they were no longer able to ignore the severity of the situation. While the family was still grappling with Peggy's deteriorating health, the unimaginable happened. Dwayne, her teenage son, began experiencing the same unbearable symptoms. He was overcome with nausea, weakness, and severe discomfort. Fear began to take hold of the family as they realized this was no ordinary illness. Convinced that something sinister was at play, they contacted the authorities, sparking a thorough investigation into the mysterious sickness that was slowly tearing their family apart. With two family members gravely ill, the Carr household was overwhelmed with panic and uncertainty. Weeks passed as doctors and investigators worked tirelessly to determine the cause of the illnesses. Then, on December 2nd, a horrifying discovery came to light. Medical tests revealed that the Carr family had dangerously high levels of thallium in their bodies. Thallium, a highly toxic substance often used in rat poison, was the culprit behind their suffering. The test results confirmed what the family had feared. This was not an accident. Someone had deliberately poisoned them, targeting them in a cold and calculated way. The revelation sent shockwaves through the Carr household, leaving them devastated and desperate for answers. News of the thallium poisoning quickly spread through the small town of Alturas, shaking the close-knit community to its core. People who once felt safe in their quiet neighborhood now lived in fear, wondering who could have committed such a heinous act. The Carr family's ordeal became a chilling reminder that even in the most peaceful of towns, darkness can lurk in the shadows. Their lives, once so simple and serene, had been turned upside down by a sinister force that sought to destroy them. The quiet town of Alturas, Florida, where neighbors trusted one another and many left their doors unlocked, was suddenly overwhelmed by fear and uncertainty. The deliberate poisoning of the Carr family had shaken the community to its core. The once serene neighborhood was now rife with anxiety as residents questioned whether they too could become targets of this terrifying crime. The very foundation of their sense of security was shattered, leaving people afraid of the unknown and suspicious of their surroundings. Conversations were dominated by speculation, and rumors spread rapidly, only adding to the growing unease. Without any immediate explanation for how thallium had infiltrated the Carr household, the town's collective worry intensified. The authorities, under mounting pressure to provide answers, launched a full-scale investigation to uncover the source of the poison. Their first step was to conduct a meticulous search of the Carr family's home, hoping to find clues that would solve the mystery. Every room was carefully examined, and no corner was left unchecked. From the pantry to the refrigerator, food and beverages were analyzed, and cleaning supplies were tested for contamination. Investigators even went as far as collecting dust samples from surfaces, suspecting it might hold traces of the deadly substance. Despite their exhaustive efforts, the inspection of the Carr home yielded no concrete evidence. There were no signs of contaminated food, drinks, or household products. Frustrated but undeterred, investigators shifted their focus to Peggy Carr's workplace. Peggy worked as a waitress at a local diner, a busy spot where food and beverages were prepared and served daily. The possibility that the poison had originated there seemed plausible, so the diner became the next focal point of the investigation. Police carefully examined every aspect of the establishment, from the storage areas and kitchen to the utensils and serving plates. At the diner, investigators tested the food and beverages that were served to customers and employees alike. They also closely scrutinized the areas where Peggy prepared and served meals, hoping to find a connection to the thallium poisoning. Yet, their search came up empty once again. No traces of the toxin were found in any of the food, drinks, or surfaces tested, and none of Peggy's co-workers exhibited any symptoms of poisoning. This discovery ruled out the diner as a potential source, leaving investigators back at square one with more questions than answers. In their quest for answers, authorities expanded their investigation to include potential communal sources of contamination. Alturas, a small farming town, relied heavily on local wells and water lines for its water supply. If the poison had somehow entered the town's water system, it could have endangered not just the Carr family, but the entire community. Investigators collected water samples from the Carr household, nearby wells, and the town's main water lines. They also inspected surrounding farms, orange groves, and other areas where contamination might have occurred. Despite their thorough efforts, all water samples tested clean, ruling out the possibility of widespread contamination. As each lead seemed to hit a dead end, frustration among both the authorities and the townspeople grew. The mystery of how the Carr family had been poisoned became a source of deep concern, not just for the family, but for everyone in Alturas. The uncertainty created a climate of suspicion and fear, with residents wondering if they might unknowingly come into contact with the same poison. For the Carr family, the nightmare only deepened as they were left with no answers and no sense of safety in their own home. The case, which had started as a disturbing personal tragedy, now loomed over the entire community, leaving everyone desperate for a breakthrough. Despite thorough testing, no traces of thallium were found in the water supply, ruling out the possibility that the poison had been introduced through this route. While this discovery provided some relief to the wider community, it did little to ease the growing fear. The lack of answers left residents on edge, questioning the safety of their own homes and daily routines. Many families began taking extreme precautions, such as avoiding tap water entirely, relying solely on bottled water, and avoiding meals at local restaurants. The once tranquil town of Alturas found itself paralyzed by fear and suspicion, unsure of where the threat might strike next. The absence of clear evidence only deepened the anxiety. With no definitive source of the poison, speculation and rumors spread quickly. Some believed the poisoning might be part of a larger, more sinister plot targeting the entire town, while others began to point fingers at neighbors and acquaintances, creating a climate of mistrust. The Carr family's tragedy had quickly grown into a community-wide nightmare. Law enforcement was under immense pressure to uncover the truth and provide reassurance, but progress in the investigation was slow and frustrating. Residents began to fear that thallium, an invisible and silent killer, could be lurking in their everyday lives. The investigation took a dramatic turn when authorities discovered several unopened bottles of Coca-Cola inside the Carr household. At first glance, the bottles appeared completely normal. They were factory sealed and indistinguishable from any other soft drink purchased at a local store. However, given the family's worsening symptoms and the mounting desperation for answers, investigators decided to test the contents of the bottles. What they found was both horrifying and revealing. Each bottle contained a lethal dose of thallium, enough to kill an adult. This was no accident. Someone had deliberately tampered with these beverages to target the Carr family. The discovery of the poisoned Coca-Cola bottles sent shockwaves through Alturas and beyond. Coca-Cola, a household name and one of the most popular beverages in the world, was now at the center of a chilling mystery. The idea that such a widely consumed product could be used as a vehicle for poisoning caused widespread panic. News of the tainted bottles spread like wildfire, leaving locals questioning the safety of not just Coke but other everyday food and drink items. What was once a simple act of enjoying a favorite soda had turned into a source of anxiety for the entire community. Fears of a larger-scale product tampering crisis quickly took hold. Shoppers began scrutinizing store shelves for signs of tampering, and many refused to purchase Coca-Cola or any other soft drinks until the situation was resolved. Some businesses in the area saw a sharp decline in sales as people avoided buying anything that might be remotely suspicious. The discovery of the poisoned bottles sparked an urgent response from law enforcement and the Coca-Cola company itself. Together, they launched a joint investigation to determine whether the contamination had occurred during the bottling process or if the bottles had been tampered with after leaving the factory. The stakes were high. If the poisoning had occurred during production, it could signal a widespread contamination issue with far-reaching consequences. Alternatively, if the bottles were tampered with after leaving the factory, it would indicate a calculated act by an individual targeting the Carr family specifically. Investigators raced to uncover the truth, examining the distribution chain, interviewing factory employees, and tracing the journey of the tainted bottles. For the people of Alturas, this discovery marked a turning point. It wasn't just about the Carr family anymore. It was about uncovering a potential threat that could affect anyone, anywhere, and it was a race against time to prevent further harm. If the contamination had occurred at the factory, it would have meant a potential disaster on a massive scale. Thousands, possibly millions of Coca-Cola bottles could have been poisoned, threatening consumers across the state or even the country. On the other hand, if the tampering was localized, it pointed to a calculated effort to target the Carr family specifically. With this critical distinction in mind, investigators worked tirelessly alongside Coca-Cola representatives. The company cooperated fully, granting access to their manufacturing plants, distribution centers, and supply chains, while also conducting additional quality control checks to ensure the safety of their products. After an extensive investigation, it was confirmed that the contamination had not occurred at the factory level. Coca-Cola's bottling facilities and distribution processes were found to be secure, and there was no evidence of large-scale tampering during production. This revelation was a relief for the broader public, but it narrowed the focus of the investigation. With the possibility of widespread tampering ruled out, police turned their attention to the Carr family's personal lives. Investigators began building a profile of potential suspects by scrutinizing the people closest to the family. Neighbors, co-workers, acquaintances, and even extended family members were all examined for motives, opportunities, and suspicious behavior. The poisoning was clearly a calculated and deliberate act, which meant the perpetrator likely had deep-seated anger or resentment toward the Carrs. Detectives left no stone unturned as they delved into the family's relationships, interactions, and any conflicts that could have led to such a shocking crime. As the investigation unfolded, police began to narrow their focus. The calculated nature of the crime suggested that someone with close proximity to the family had orchestrated the poisoning. Detectives theorized that the tampering of the Coca-Cola bottles required knowledge of the family's habits and access to their home. This theory led them to closely examine individuals who could fit these criteria, searching for a motive that would explain such a cold-blooded act. Each lead brought them closer to understanding the dark forces at play, but it also exposed the complex and troubling dynamics within the Carr family's world. Among the potential suspects, Pern Carr, Peggy's husband, quickly came under scrutiny. His behavior during the unfolding tragedy raised troubling questions. When Peggy first became ill, Pern appeared oddly indifferent, dismissing her symptoms as unimportant and refusing to seek medical attention despite her worsening condition. His reluctance to take Peggy to the hospital struck investigators as unusual, especially given the severity of her symptoms. While this behavior alone didn't prove guilt, it cast a shadow of suspicion over him and prompted detectives to dig deeper into his role in the family's struggles. Pern's dismissive attitude toward Peggy's suffering combined with the highly personal nature of the attack, suggested that investigators needed to take a closer look at his actions and potential motives. Could he have been involved in the poisoning, or was his behavior merely a reflection of disbelief at the gravity of the situation? The more the authorities investigated, the investigators were puzzled by Carr's apparent lack of concern as Peggy's health deteriorated and other family members began exhibiting similar symptoms. His reaction seemed detached, even as the family faced a worsening crisis. Compounding their suspicions was the fact that the timing of the poisoning incidents coincided with periods when Pern was absent from the home. This peculiar alignment raised questions about whether Pern might have been involved in, or at least aware of the attacks. While there wasn't enough evidence to accuse him outright, these details warranted closer scrutiny of his actions and potential knowledge of the situation. A chilling lead emerged when investigators revisited an anonymous letter the family had received months before Peggy's illness. The typewritten note threatened the Carrs with death if they did not leave Florida within 2 weeks. At the time, the family dismissed it as a cruel joke, but now the letter took on a more ominous significance. The warning seemed to foreshadow the poisoning, suggesting that someone had been planning the attack for months. Pern's initial dismissal of the letter as unimportant further fueled suspicions. Could he have underestimated its seriousness, or was he hiding something? As investigators delved deeper into the family's history, more unsettling discoveries came to light. They learned that 2 of the Carr family's dogs had died under mysterious circumstances in the years prior. Both animals had exhibited symptoms eerily similar to thallium poisoning. This pattern of unexplained deaths hinted at the possibility that the perpetrator had been experimenting with the poison long before targeting the Carrs. These earlier incidents painted a picture of a cold and calculating individual, testing their methods in preparation for a larger, more devastating attack on the family. The situation grew increasingly dire as the family's condition worsened. Authorities, now fully convinced of deliberate poisoning, ordered comprehensive tests for thallium exposure for every member of the household. The results were shocking. Not only did Peggy and her children have traces of the deadly chemical in their bodies, but Pern himself also tested positive. This revelation shifted the investigation dramatically. It became clear that Pern was not the mastermind behind the attack, as it was unlikely someone would deliberately poison themselves. With the murder of Peggy Carr confirmed, law enforcement intensified their efforts. The stakes were higher than ever. Finding the individual responsible wasn't just about justice for Peggy, but also about ensuring the safety of the surviving members of her family. Detectives worked tirelessly to piece together any clues that could reveal who had targeted the Carr family so deliberately. The investigation pivoted from a broad search to a more focused effort, zeroing in on those closest to the family. Their attention soon turned to George Trapal and his wife Diana, the Carr's next-door neighbors. The couple's proximity to the Carr household and their peculiar behavior quickly raised suspicions. As investigators dug into George Trapal's background, he emerged as a prime suspect. Trapal wasn't just an ordinary neighbor. He was a self-taught chemist with extensive knowledge of chemicals and their applications. This expertise immediately set off alarm bells, as the poison used in the Carr case, thallium, was not only rare but also required a sophisticated understanding of chemistry to deploy effectively. Detectives uncovered Trapal's criminal history, which included a stint in prison for his involvement in a methamphetamine manufacturing operation. His role as a chemist in that illegal activity further solidified his potential connection to the crime. The more investigators learned about Trapal, the more suspicious his actions appeared. Thallium is a particularly insidious poison, tasteless, odorless, and difficult to detect, and its use suggested a perpetrator with both scientific knowledge and a calculated mindset. Trapal's background in chemistry aligned disturbingly well with the methodical nature of the poisoning. Detectives theorized that someone with his expertise could have tampered with the Coca-Cola bottles found in the Carr home, ensuring that the poison was delivered in a controlled and deliberate manner. The idea that Trapal might have orchestrated such a chilling act began to take shape as a central theory in the investigation. Beyond his technical knowledge, investigators began examining Trapal's behavior and possible motives. His interactions with the Carr family were scrutinized for any signs of hostility or tension. While the surface relationship between the neighbors appeared cordial, detectives suspected there might be underlying conflicts or grudges that could have prompted such an extreme act. The calculated nature of the poisoning suggested that the perpetrator harbored deep resentment or a personal vendetta, and investigators worked to uncover any evidence linking Tripal to the crime. As the case against Tripal built, authorities began to see a chilling picture of a man who had the knowledge, opportunity, and possibly the motive to commit such a heinous act. The combination of his criminal past, chemical expertise, and proximity to the Carr family made him the most likely suspect. However, suspicion alone wasn't enough. Investigators knew they needed concrete evidence to tie Tripal to the poisoning and bring him to justice. With Peggy's death weighing heavily on their shoulders, they pressed forward, determined to uncover the truth and hold the person responsible accountable for their actions. As investigators dug deeper into George Tripal's background, they uncovered a troubling history of tension between him and the Carr family. The neighbors had clashed in the past over noise complaints, with Tripal openly expressing disdain and irritation toward the Carrs. This hostility added weight to the growing suspicion that Tripal might have harbored a personal grudge against them. Coupled with his expertise in chemistry and a criminal history involving toxic substances, Tripal seemed to have the motive, means, and opportunity to carry out such a calculated and devastating attack. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to align, but detectives still lacked the concrete evidence needed to make an arrest. With Tripal emerging as the primary suspect, law enforcement knew they faced a formidable challenge. Tripal was highly intelligent, meticulous, and unlikely to incriminate himself in a standard interrogation. Investigators needed a new approach, one that could bypass his defenses and uncover irrefutable proof of his involvement. Recognizing the complexity of the case, the FBI stepped in and devised a daring undercover operation. The goal was to infiltrate Tripal's inner circle and gather critical evidence to tie him directly to the poisoning of the Carr family. Special Agent Susan Gorek was chosen to lead this high-stakes mission. Agent Gorek was an experienced investigator with a talent for adopting convincing undercover roles. For this operation, she created the persona of Sherry Gwynn, a vulnerable woman struggling with a messy divorce from an abusive husband. Under this guise, she set out to ingratiate herself with Tripal, gaining his trust and positioning herself to observe him closely. Tripal was known for hosting elaborate murder mystery events, a peculiar hobby that would provide the perfect opportunity for Gorek to interact with him without raising suspicion. These events, designed to challenge guests to solve fictional crimes, offered a disturbing parallel to the real-life tragedy investigators believe Tripal had orchestrated. In April 1989, Gorek attended one of Tripal's infamous murder mystery weekends, hosted by Tripal and his wife Diana at their home. The gathering was anything but ordinary. Guests were invited to play detective, solving fabricated murder cases using clues strategically provided by the hosts. While most attendees treated the event as a game, law enforcement viewed it as a potential window into Tripal's mindset. The very theme of the weekend, focused on solving murders, seemed eerily reflective of the Carr family's ordeal. Gorek's role was both critical and precarious. She needed to engage with Tripal, earn his trust, and remain vigilant for any signs of guilt or incriminating behavior. Throughout the weekend, Gorek interacted with Tripal under the guise of her invented identity. She observed his demeanor, participated in the activities, and paid close attention to any comments he made. To her surprise, Tripal appeared completely at ease, unfazed by the presence of a newcomer in his home. This composure only deepened the investigators' concerns, as it hinted at a man confident in his ability to evade suspicion. Despite his outward calm, Gorek noticed subtle cues that suggested a darker side to his personality, a fascination with control, manipulation, and the concept of perfect crimes. These traits aligned disturbingly well with the calculated nature of the poisoning case. For Gorek, the undercover operation was an exercise in patience and precision. She had to balance her interactions carefully, ensuring she didn't arouse Tripal's suspicion while subtly steering conversations in a way that might yield valuable insights. The weekend provided a unique glimpse into Tripal's world, and while it didn't immediately uncover a smoking gun, it strengthened the case against him. Law enforcement now had a clearer picture of Tripal's personality and his potential. The weekend provided Gorek with invaluable insights into Tripal's mindset and personality, but it was only the beginning. She knew that while she had gathered useful clues, these alone would not be enough to secure a conviction. Tripal was meticulous and intelligent, unlikely to slip up in a way that would directly incriminate him. Gorek realized she would need to deepen her infiltration, continuing to interact with Tripal in a way that would build his trust while subtly gathering more evidence. Her initial success laid the groundwork for future encounters, allowing her to embed herself further into Trapal's life. Over the following months, Gorek, still posing as Sherry Gwynn, maintained regular contact with Trapal. She carefully orchestrated meetings and conversations, always playing the part of an empathetic and curious individual eager to learn from Trapal's intellect. Each interaction was an opportunity to observe him more closely, analyze his personality, and probe for any potential confessions or slips of the tongue. Trapal, seemingly unaware of her true intentions, continued to engage with her, discussing topics that often veered into areas of chemistry, problem-solving, and criminal psychology, subjects he appeared to find particularly intriguing. Despite his guarded demeanor, Gorek's persistence and strategic questioning began to yield subtle but significant information. Trapal's fascination with poisons, his methodical approach to problem-solving, and his apparent disdain for the Carr family all contributed to the growing case against him. However, Gorek knew the stakes were high. Trapal was cautious and calculating, and a single misstep on her part could jeopardize the entire operation. As she worked to earn his trust, she remained focused on her ultimate goal, gathering enough solid evidence to ensure that George Trapal would be held accountable for his heinous actions. Agent Susan Gorek continued her undercover mission with unwavering focus, perfecting her role as Sherry Gwynn, a struggling woman seeking solace and understanding. Her portrayal of vulnerability worked to her advantage as George Trapal appeared to let his guard down during their interactions. Gorek's ability to empathize and connect with him on a personal level allowed her to gather critical insights into his personality, mindset, and habits. The investigation team worked tirelessly behind the scenes, analyzing the information Gorek brought back after every encounter. Each interaction was carefully recorded, ensuring there was a detailed account of Trapal's behavior and words. But while progress was being made, time was not on their side. The investigators needed hard, irrefutable evidence to charge Trapal and bring justice for the Carr family. Suspicion alone was not enough. What they required was tangible proof that he had been behind the deliberate and calculated thallium poisoning. As Gorek deepened her connection with Trapal, the pressure mounted to gather something concrete before he became suspicious of her intentions. After months of patient and strategic work, Gorek achieved a major breakthrough. Under the guise of seeking advice, she convinced Trapal to invite her to his home. This was a significant step, as investigators believed that his residence might hold critical evidence tying him to the crime. Gorek played her part skillfully, acting as a curious but casual visitor, careful not to appear overly interested in anything that might arouse suspicion. Inside Trapal's home, she took mental notes of every detail she saw, observing his possessions, the layout of the house, and anything that could potentially link him to the poisoning of the Carr family. As Gorek moved through Trapal's home, she noticed several unusual and suspicious features. There were areas that appeared deliberately hidden or locked away, such as a secret passage in the library. Certain rooms contained lab equipment and chemicals, reinforcing the investigators' theory that Trapal's background as a chemist had been instrumental in the crime. While she refrained from touching anything or lingering too long, Gorek's observations provided the investigation team with a clearer picture of the potential evidence they might uncover if granted access to the house. Every detail she reported brought them closer to building a solid case against Trapal. The visit to Trapal's home confirmed many of the suspicions investigators had held since the beginning of the case. Trapal's meticulous nature and his expertise in chemistry were evident in the setup of his house, where he had clearly created an environment that allowed him to work in secrecy. However, Gorek's mission was far from over. Her access to the house was only the first step in what the team hoped would be the final stretch of the investigation. The key now was to secure a search warrant based on her findings, allowing law enforcement to formally search Trapal's property for evidence. While Gorek's undercover work brought the team closer to a resolution, it also emphasized the high stakes of the operation. One wrong move could compromise months of effort and potentially endanger her safety. Yet her ability to stay calm under pressure and adapt to every situation proved invaluable. The evidence she gathered during her visit to Trapal's home became a pivotal turning point in the case. Investigators were now confident that they were closing in on the truth. With the groundwork laid, finally their hard work paid off. Law enforcement secured the much-needed search warrant for Trapal's home and garage, They knew that time was of the essence, and they wasted no time in executing the warrant. As they combed through his property, the investigators remained vigilant, hoping to find something that would confirm their suspicions. It wasn't long before their persistence was rewarded. In a small corner of the garage, tucked away among various tools and equipment, they discovered a vial labeled thallium nitrate. The vial of thallium nitrate was a direct match to the poison that had been found in the bodies of the Carr family members. It was the breakthrough the investigators had been desperately searching for. The presence of this lethal chemical in Trapal's possession confirmed that he was not only aware of the poison's effects, but also had access to it. This discovery left no room for doubt. Trapal was responsible for the poisoning. The evidence was irrefutable, and the investigators knew they had finally found the key to solving the case. With this critical evidence in hand, law enforcement wasted no time in taking action. On April 5, 1990, George Trapal was arrested at his home, charged with the murder of Peggy Carr and the attempted poisoning of her family. The arrest marked a major turning point in the case and brought a sense of relief to the community, which had been shaken by the uncertainty surrounding the mysterious poisonings. The vial of thallium nitrate found in his garage was a key piece of evidence that connected him directly to the crime, making it clear that he had meticulously planned and executed the attack. Trapal's arrest sent shockwaves through the community as people struggled to comprehend the true scale of the crime. For the Carr family, it marked the end of a long and painful ordeal. The arrest provided them with some closure, though the pain of their loss would never fully fade. For the investigators, it was a moment of triumph knowing that their hard work and determination had finally paid off. With the evidence now in hand, the case was far from over, but the arrest of George Trapal was a crucial step toward ensuring that he would be held accountable for his actions. The trial of George Trapal, which began in January 1991, shed light on the full scope of his chilling actions. The prosecution presented a compelling case backed by an overwhelming amount of evidence that painted a disturbing picture of Trapal's deliberate and calculated plan to harm the Carr family. One of the most crucial pieces of evidence was the vial of thallium nitrate discovered in his garage. This vial, which contained the same poison that had been found in Peggy Carr and her family, directly linked him to the crime, solidifying the case against him. As the trial unfolded, the prosecution introduced additional witnesses who knew Trapal also took the stand, painting a picture of a man who had a deep disdain for the Carr family. His obsession with chemistry and poisons was well known, and several people testified that he had openly discussed his interest in dangerous substances. The prosecution used these testimonies to highlight Trapal's arrogance and superiority complex, suggesting that he believed he was above others, capable of carrying out such a heinous act without fear of consequence. This portrayal of Trapal as a calculating and intelligent man resonated with the jury, making it increasingly clear that he had carefully planned and executed the poisoning of the Carr family. The jury, having carefully considered all the evidence and testimonies presented during the trial, reached a unanimous verdict in a surprisingly short amount of time. After just 4 hours of deliberation, they found George Trapal guilty of all charges, including the murder of Peggy Carr and the attempted poisoning of her family. The decision came as a moment of relief for the Carr family and the community of Alturas, who had suffered for months under the shadow of this horrifying crime. The guilty verdict confirmed what many had feared. Trapal was indeed the mastermind behind the deadly plot. The judge did not take long to impose a sentence, declaring that Trapal's actions were not only premeditated, but also carried out in a particularly cruel and malicious manner. With the gravity of his crime clear, the judge sentenced Trapal to death, acknowledging the severity of his deliberate and methodical attack on an innocent family. The death sentence was a stark reminder of the consequences of his heinous actions. For the Carr family, hearing those words was bittersweet, as they had finally seen the person responsible for their unimaginable suffering held accountable. This sentence marked the end of a long and exhaustive investigation into the poisoning of the Carr family. The case, which had begun with the mysterious illnesses and deaths of Peggy Carr and her loved ones, had unraveled many shocking truths. For the law enforcement team, securing a conviction brought a sense of closure, knowing that their hard work and dedication had ultimately paid off. However, for the Carr family, justice for Peggy's death came with a mix of relief and sadness, as no sentence could. Gork's success in navigating the complex and dangerous world of a criminal mastermind like Trapal was a testament to her skill, patience, and bravery. Her ability to work in the shadows without alerting Trapal to the growing evidence against him allowed law enforcement to build a solid case. After the trial, Gork was widely praised for her dedication and courage. The Carr family, in particular, expressed their deep gratitude for her role in securing justice for Peggy. Her work was instrumental in ensuring that the person responsible for their suffering would be held accountable. The emotional toll of the case, however, didn't end with Trapal's conviction. The surviving members of the Carr family, though they eventually recovered physically from the poisoning, were left to cope with deep emotional scars. The loss of Peggy Carr, a beloved mother and wife, was a tragedy that no conviction could undo. While the family found some measure of closure through the trial and the sentencing of Trapal, the grief from their loss remained an ever-present part of their lives. For the Carr family, especially for Dwayne Carr, the pain was especially raw. Dwayne, just 16 years old at the time, had witnessed his mother's health deteriorate over the course of many months. He had also suffered from the effects of the poisoning himself. The loss of Peggy under such cruel circumstances was something that left him struggling with overwhelming grief. The emotional toll of watching his mother slowly decline and then losing her so suddenly and unjustly weighed heavily on him. In the wake of his mother's death, Dwayne had difficulty processing the complex emotions of grief and anger. The trauma of the poisoning, compounded by the long, painful trial, left him struggling to find a way to cope with the loss. At times, he would lash out in anger, unable to control. In the wake of his mother's tragic death, Dwayne Carr found a way to cope with his grief by writing heartfelt letters to Peggy. These letters were not just a way to express his sorrow, but also a means to maintain a connection with her, even though she was no longer there. In each letter, he poured